everyone, this is Zach Edwards for another episode of the Adventure Box podcast. This is where we talk about all things history. Today, we're actually going through the French and Indian War. As we promised you, last week we started with the linchpin. Do you remember what a linchpin is? Think of World War I. What set World War I aflame? When did it start? The linchpin is said to be the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And when we go into World War I, we'll actually go through all the bits and pieces, how that one event eventually turned into World War I. Now, also remember, World War I was not the first World War. That was actually the 7 Years' War, where we have all the European powers all getting into a huff over certain things, and we'll go over that. Again, we did that somewhat last week. But the 7 Years' War is basically the same, was at the exact same time as the French and Indian War. And the French and Indian War was just one length of the 7 Years' War. So there was other parts of it, such as there was Africa, the African front, there was the South American and Caribbean front, and there was the Indian front. So there's a lot of different parts to the 7 Years' War, which the French and Indian War is what we're going to be focusing on, but not this week. This week, we're going to be talking about some other things, including what happens when a war first starts. Yes, you declare war. Okay. Usually before you declare war, you do something essential. You cannot do it without it and hope to survive and hope to win. The first thing you do is always to create an alliance. You create alliances with other countries who are going to have your back when things go awry. I'll give you an example of that. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to bring up today is what happens when, say, you have like 5 different fronts. You have to fight in North America, and you have to fight in India, and you have to fight in Europe, and you have to fight in Africa. That's a lot of places to scatter your forces abroad. But if you can actually say you're going to go after, most of your time is going to be spent in North America. Maybe another portion is going to be in India. Sometimes you might have to cut off ones that you cannot defend, such as I'm not going to worry about Africa, and I'm not going to worry about South America. A lot of times people will say, well, I'm doing exactly what affects me personally. And that's what we do in life. A lot of times it's like, you know what, that person being beaten up over there, that's not my part. I'm worried about myself and the only things that I can do. Now, you may think of it as selfish, or you might think it as self-preservation. There's only a certain amount of bandwidth that you have. For instance, I got a great example from today. Okay, so I had to do my social media before breakfast, before my kids even got up. So I woke up at 4:45. And I was doing my social media part. I had to drive my kids to school. And during that time, we had some other things that popped up. Then came breakfast. So at 6:30, I went upstairs and I took care of breakfast. Well, this is again, all these different fronts. I had to start the eggs for my wife. No, I didn't have to. I wanted to. I wanted to start the eggs for my wife. Then I had the fruit smoothie that almost everyone likes in the morning. So I went and did the fruit smoothie. So I'm putting all these ingredients in, and there was a struggle between 2 of our kids. Again, I have 6 kids, 5 kids in the house right now. So 2 are from are from me biologically, 3 that are not. Or sorry, different way. 3 that are mine biologically, and 2 that are not. But they're all family. My daughters that were from my wife's previous marriage are my daughters. I don't even call them stepdaughters. They're my daughters. And so I have all these different people that I want to please. I want to do things for. I want to kiss them all goodbye before they go off to school. I want to prepare them a good breakfast that's healthy, which is why I do the fruit smoothies with protein drink inside, little apples, little orange, banana, frozen berries, and protein drink. So I have all these different things that I have to do. I cannot be in all places at all times. So I come down to work. things are okay. I'm just a little bit behind today. And I had a meeting with my sales rep. So I meet with my sales rep and it went a little bit longer than I should have. Okay. Then I had a text from my son that says, "Hey Dad, I brought sweatpants and I need shorts for wrestling." I'm like, "Dude, seriously? You didn't think about this before?" He's like, "I'm sorry, but I need these shorts if I'm going to go wrestle." And he says, "I need them by 11:30, and can you put a sandwich in there too?" I was like, "You don't want a school lunch?" "No, not really." I said, "Okay." So that was okay. I mean, it was manageable. But then I had my brother call me who wanted a family conference with something that the family was doing. Okay, sure. So which ones do I do and which ones do I not do? Now, when it comes to alliances, like in a family, you have multiple people that can help out. My wife could help. She basically did her own eggs. When it came to my fruit smoothie, somebody else could have done it, but I always seem to do it. Picking up kids, dropping off kids, that's another thing that could be done by others. And then also the conference call with my brother, I could have said no. Now, luckily enough, I was driving to the school to drop off the shorts and the sandwich. And then my son said, "Well, it's past 11:30, so don't worry about it because I already had lunch. The sandwich is already in the bag, so that's it." And then with my brother, I was able to talk to him and have this conference call while driving because there's not much I can do. Oh, and did I mention that my rental called up and said, "Hey, the heater went out and something hit our power lines in the back of the house and sent sparks everywhere this morning." I'm like, "Golly, how many things do I have at the same time?" Now that I've told you about my whole life, all in one little package, that all happened this morning. That all happened before 11 o'clock this morning. Okay. Think of war. War is not just 1, 2, or 3 fronts. You usually have like a dozen different places that you have to worry about. So, again, going back to the question I said at the very beginning, what is the first thing you want to do when you get into war? Before a country gets into war, what's the first thing you want to do? Is you want to find out if someone has your 6. What is your 6? Think of it 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Okay, so 12 o'clock is where you're going. It's straight for you. Your 6 o'clock is what's behind you. Other things that are happening behind you, such as in a war, certain places you can't cover, you want somebody else to cover. So these are people that can pull the slack behind you and that are going to be have an alliance with you, a treaty with you. So let's go over some of these diplomatic, well, it's called the diplomatic revolution. This is the beginning of the seven Years' War. Before it even began, there was different lines that were crossed, different alliances that were made. Now, last week we talked about the War of Secession, of Austrian Secession. War of Austrian Secession. And basically what that was is King Charles the 6th, 7th, one of those, 7th passed away, died, and his daughter was supposed to be in his place. He wanted his daughter to come in place. Well, the other European powers did not like that, so they went to war. Prussia attacked Austria, trying to take up some of the land. Now, Prussia was aligned with France. And this is 10 years before the 7 Years' War starts up. And again, this is all the linchpin. This is what started the first real World War, being the 7 Years' War. Okay, so you have France, Spain, and Prussia versus Great Britain and Austria. But then what does happen? What happens is, the first part of the diplomatic revolution, France and Austria team up. Usually bitter enemies, but they actually align up in power. They create the first Treaty of Versailles, 1759. Now this marks a dramatic reversal of everything that happens because, again, France was aligned with Prussia. Prussia was trying to steal Austrian land. Now, what was the other thing that happened? If Prussia is no longer with France, Prussia now teams up with Great Britain. And why is that? Because France and Britain are against each other. France just made an alliance with Austria, cutting out Prussia. And Prussia's like, wait a second. We're enemies of Austria. So we're going to team up with Great Britain. So there's a whole realignment there. All over Europe, there's all new alignments. Some of the neutrals become allies. Some of the allies become neutral. So it's a whole mix-up. Because this is a different war. This is 10 years later. And different people are in different economic places. They're also different military places. And so now Prussia and Britain are friends, are allies, not friends, allies. What does this do? So basically, if Britain decides, and this is what Britain does, Britain decides to put most of their pressure on two places. The two places that have the most about trade. You have the North America, being the French and Indian War, and then you also have, well, actually through one of your companies, you start putting pressure on India. Not on India itself, but the French influence in India. And so that becomes one of the battlefields for the 7 Years' War. You have the French and Indian War, which is actually part of the 7 Years' War, in North America. When it comes to Africa, yes, there's a little bit there, but not much. It's too much to do. He can't do a fruit smoothie and do the eggs on the oven at the same time. So Great Britain, they're going to put their influence, their emphasis on these two locations, North America, India. But wait a minute, they also have Europe, which is still in war. So it's the start of the war. What do they do there? Well, that's why they aligned with Prussia. Prussia has agreed with Great Britain to allow them to help out in Europe and basically control the military attacks and such that are happening in Europe. Now, they would have actually help from Great Britain, but they're going to be mostly in charge of that area. So they ensure European protection and European interests of Great Britain will be protected by Prussia. Okay, so again, this is a huge, significant change in diplomacy. Everything's changed at this point. Again, 10 years later, alliances change. New alliances create broken alliances with others, which create new alliances with others. So who are the four big influences in Europe at this time? Great Britain, France. Now there is Spain, but France. Because Spain stays mostly out of it, but they're a quiet partner, a silent alliance with France, though they don't do as much. And then you have Prussia and you have Austria. Those are the four big ones that are up there. So this allows for France, they shift to Austria to help them. You can also, sorry, still getting over my cold from last week. So yeah, this creates a big power struggle in Europe. But remember, everyone was just going through the War of Secession. There's a lot of money that was spent during that time. So they're really not wanting to create these new wars here, even though they did fight some. Okay, so how about a new person? This is where Russia joins the Franco-Austrian coalition. Okay, do you remember the First World War or Second World War? This is where you have the Allies and the Axis. Axis and Allies. These were people that were for a certain side and these people that were for another side. And they were fighting. And they would team up with all these different countries. Well, the same thing happened during the 7 Years' War, where you had Russia now, France, and Austria. And so under Empress Elizabeth, Russia supports these two countries, being France and Austria. And Russia's aim is to curb Prussian territorial ambitions. So they're worried that Prussia is going to move into Russia. So of course, they're going to side with Central and Eastern Europe, which is Central being Austria, and Eastern Europe, sorry, other way around. Central Europe being some of the smaller countries and France, Eastern being Austria, and going to fight against another enemy. So they joined up with these two because the common enemy is Prussia. So now you have Prussia versus Russia versus France versus Austria. Holy cow. So Prussia does not want any more skillets on the fire. So it's like if you're cooking a big dinner, you have multiple skillets on the fire. They already have like every corner of them taken care of. So what now happens? Oh, wait a second. Spain was neutral, and then they start to lean towards France. This is what I was talking about, the silent partnership, the silent alliance. And they have a connection. Now remember, during the Ottoman Empire, when it first started, first started taking over, took over Constantinople, made it Istanbul, France has sided with the Ottoman Empire. Spain was against France. So, this is very interesting. All these different lines, all different times. So they enter by 1761. So 5 years in, Spain formally joins the war on France's side. And yeah, we're going to leave it there. Another thing that it is, it's actually a family relationship. So there are, they call it the Third Family Compact. So we don't go much into that. We will do that when we go into European history. Okay, next thing, last thing to talk about when it comes to the alliances, because that's what today we're talking about, the alliances. You also have all the small countries. You have the small powers, and these normally stay neutral. The Dutch Republic. Oh, sorry. Wow, that was out of nowhere. The French Republic, Portugal, Italian states, they all stay neutral. Although Portugal later sides with Britain due to a traditional alliance that they had. Okay, now what are the consequences of this alliance? Well, Europe. The alliance is set the stage for this war. With everyone joining on to all these different all these different groups, you can't really stop a war. Okay, I'll give you an example. So what was happening that started Russia attacking Ukraine? There was talk of Ukraine entering NATO. Now, NATO is an organization, modern day. NATO is an organization of different countries that will all have their backs if a war starts. There's like 20 NATO countries. Well, Ukraine wanted to become one of them. Russia said, "Don't you even. You make them a part of the NATO alliance, and we will declare war." And a lot of those in DC said, "We don't really care. They're going to be part of that alliance, and we're going to make them part of that. And if you attack them, you'll be attacking NATO." Well, that's the rule. If you attack a NATO state, a NATO country, all the other NATO countries are supposed to come to your defense. It's a coalition. It's a confederacy. Except they don't like the word confederacy anymore because of what happened with the U.S. Civil War. But a confederate is basically where different groups come together in times of war. So they don't like this, but it is what it is. In the Ukraine and Russian war, Russia, as soon as we said that they were going to be NATO, they attacked. Now, it did take days, and there was a lot of threats being pushed around. Well, it was totally mismanaged. 100% mismanaged. And so because of that, now we have Russia that wants to take over Ukraine and basically force that there will not be a NATO country of Ukraine. So a new administration is coming in. They have the concept of, well, they're not going to be in NATO, and we want peace, and we're going to force Russia and force Ukraine to align in a peace deal. Well, great. So in this, you have all these different groups that are about to that are setting up the feeling of a war. with all these different alliances. Remember, this is before the war starts. All these alliances are set. So what happens when you have a ton of alliances? Well, one side is going to get nervous than the other side. So that is what happens. Now, you also have the colonial theater, which is, again, North America. British focused to leveraging their naval force to defeat France in the Americas, in North America, the Caribbean, India, and that's it. They didn't want to worry about Africa, even though that was a possibility. The next thing to think about, balance of powers. So these new alliances underscore a fluid nature of European diplomacy that's going back and forth. It is a theater. How about this? It's more like a betting table. Because basically, when you set up an alliance, you're like, if I make this alliance, then that person's not going to do this. Oh, forgetting betting table. It's chess. Every piece on the chessboard is a country. If you have this alliance and they move here, and you have this alliance and they move here, that means the other ones are going to have to create alliances against you because they're worried that you're going to take them over. So they're going to make certain moves as well. So chess was actually built on the idea where you see the knights and the horses. It's about alliances. It's about strategy. Well, the same thing goes with alliances. Before you even start a war, before you even get to the battles, to the wars, you have to focus on where you're going to attack. What are you going to do? And so that's a big part of, oops, that's not supposed to be there. That's supposed to be part of this. So that was the beginning of 1756. Now what happens in the end of 1756? That's when they declare war. This is when they have a formal agreement. Now, just before this time, you have Braddock's expedition. Braddock's expedition is in the North America. We talked about this a little bit last Thursday, I think. Braddock's expedition is basically, it was the early 1755 when the British are trying to come in and take over Fort Duchesne. Duchesne? Duchesne. I think it's called Duchesne. And so the British send in General Edward Braddock, and everything is supposed to go great, and they totally fall apart. It does not work. And so during these battles, you have a lot of people dying. And if I remember correctly, didn't Braddock die during that battle? Let's see. Did Braddock die during his Braddock's expedition? Yes, I am Googling it, like I always tell you. So again, I'd have to do a little more research, but just off the top of the hat, yes, okay, I was right. So Braddock dies during this expedition. But here's the thing. Here's a really interesting story, and no one can actually say if this is 100% true or if it's coincidence or divine intervention, I'll put it. So the Battle of Monongahela, hello, hello, Monongahela. I gotta look that up. But it happened in July 9th, 1755. This is where Braddock goes into battle and dies. During this expedition, during this battle, George Washington is left by himself, commanding all the troops. And so he's a lower end official. His office, his rank is lower than Braddock's. Braddock's is a general. I think by this time, George Washington's like a lieutenant colonel. And so Braddock dies, and you have George Washington up on his horse, motivating the troops to keep fighting as they tried to take over Fort Duchesne. Well, during the expedition, Washington's being shot at over and over and over again. And so even though he's being shot at, he doesn't take one bullet. Afterwards, he takes off his coat and he has like 5 bullet holes all throughout his jacket. Places that would have pierced him, but there's no bullets in him. So it's a really interesting experience for him. One that was probably probably helped his faith, but at the same time, you had to wonder what happened that none of the bullets actually pierced him. But Braddock himself is actually shot in the abdomen and in the chest during the chaotic retreat. So he was actually leaving at the time. And you have George Washington trying to motivate the troops and also get them out of there. But Braddock dies July 13th, 1755. A few days later, again, he was shot in the chest and the abdomen. He's going to die. Especially during those times, they didn't have the modern medicine that we have right now. And even then, it would be questionable that a person would survive. So those are one of the earliest George Washington skirmishes of actual traditional battles. The other ones were an ambush. The other ones were, actually both of them were ambushes. One on his Fort Necessity and one on him ambushing a scouting troop of French. So, yeah. So that was happening in North America. So with the declaration of war in 1756, that's when they could start fighting. That's when the real battles start up. And we'll talk about those next week. This week, though, between today and Thursday, we're actually going to be talking about here in North America. Well, sorry, we're going to be talking about the diplomatic relations, which is what we're talking about today. But we're also going to be talking about the battles that were happening over in Europe. Now, we will actually mention some of the French victories in the United States, but we're staying mostly on the global impact, the European involvement, and the escalation. So stay tuned for that. We'll talk to you more about the French victories in North America and what was happening over in Europe. Basically, the Battle of Minorca. And, well, I'm not going to get, I could get so much more into it. I'm going to hold off until the next time we meet. So thanks so much for joining me. If you have any questions, please send them to my email, zach@historicalconquest.com. That'll give you everything you need, give you full access to ask me any questions, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible with your questions if I don't use them in the actual videos as I'm making them. So you send me some really good questions. I'm going to put them in this podcast and let other people hear your same questions. So thanks so much for joining me, and I can't wait to talk to you next time. Take care. Have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.